All right, so this is day one, and we are going to be starting with identities. I think I should share this with you as well. Yeah, no, of course. Azure Active Directory. So when we say Active Directory, um, that is where we manage our users, our groups. So for on-premises, there is the Windows Active Directory. So you have customers saying, all right, we want to migrate to the cloud. We want to create identities in the cloud. And that is when we start talking about the Azure Active Directory. So let's do this illustration together. Usually on premises, let's categorize this as two. Let's assume this is on-prem. When I say on-premises, I mean physical location, your headquarters, your your data center, private data center. So I will use that word interchangeably. Private data center, on-premises location, Azure data center. And when I say Azure data center, I actually mean Azure cloud. So in this case now, we have an on-premises environment slash private data center. And we have Azure data center. All right. And on premises, we have Windows Active Directory. Sorry, yeah, Windows AD. If it's Windows, then it's on-prem. So we're going to have a server where the identities are managed on premises. And we call these servers domain controllers, right? That is where you're going to have the users, the groups, the policy objects, and everything that corresponds to that. What else do you think we could have in the on-prem Active Directory? Just look at your own office environment. How do you manage your users, your accounts, your groups? How do people authenticate? So you're going to have apps running on premises. So now give me an example of apps. What app comes to mind? Nobody? You might be using Zoom for your comms, for communications. Might be using Jira for documentation, SharePoint. So just think of it, apps. Anything could be apps. The organization could have, they could have procurement platforms where they interact with vendors. So anything could be considered as apps, whatever that makes the business to run smoothly, whatever that enhances business operations digitally. Yeah. So they could have as many apps running on premises, running in multiple servers. So that leads us to another example. You're going to have servers, right? You're going to have application servers, app servers on premises, supporting multiple platforms, test environments, for dev environments, for production environments. Since this is an identity service, as a matter of fact, the most important thing here is your users. Users and groups. Okay. So you have user Tom Jones at a domain, right? There's going to be a domain name. So maybe the company's name is blextech.com. So you're going to have a user Tom Jones at blextech.com, first name, last name at domain name, right? Janet Johnson at blextech.com, at at google.com, whatever the company's domain name is. And groups, departments, units in the organization. So groups could point to the IT department, the security department, the finance department, the HR department. All these are going to be managed as groups in Active Directory. And then what do we use for authentication? For authentication, auth.
MFA.
So because it's Windows, Windows Active Directory has its own authentication protocol. NTLM. Are you familiar with Kerberos? Have you heard of Kerberos? Huh?
Out of what?
Have you heard of Kerberos?
No.
Kerberos authentication. So that is what is used. These are just few. And of course, remember I told you the other time. GPUs. So when you hear of GPUs, that's a group policy objects. What did you say the other time? Group policy objects, organizational units, OU. All those are managed in the domain controller. That's so domain controller. Kerberos, NTLM, that's the authentication protocol. Now let's go to Azure. Let's see how this is different in Azure. Now, Azure, this is Microsoft Data Center. Why is this bent? I'm trying to figure this. Okay. So let's go to Azure. What's similar here? You're going to have users as well, right? So this is for those that already have a cloud identity environment. What do you do first? You create a username and create password for them. maybe you mandate them to change the password upon initial login. For instance, you might be having a new employee resuming on Monday, and you were told that, okay, we have this user that's going to be joining the team. This is going to be his email. Set up an account for him. Configure his server, his remote desktop. Configure his virtual desktop image, VDI. And so that person will use the email and temporary password that was provided to log in for the first time. And then it will be prompted to reset the password. And of course, because this is Azure, we start talking about the SaaS platforms. SaaS means software as a service, especially the Azure SaaS offerings, like Microsoft 365. You'll be able to access those in Azure. You're going to be able to access Azure resources and services because you are already in Azure. Remember, you are in Azure now. So you now have access to Azure resources. You can create Kubernetes clusters. You can create virtual machines. You can create anything you want, as long as you have permission. And of course, you might be using Jira, I'll be using DocuSign, using SharePoint, Zoom, Trello. Just think of it, any app that you have running on-prem in Azure, you'll be able to access those as well. And of course, you're going to have apps. Okay, maybe that serves as apps. Software as a service applications. Yeah. So for authentication and authorization, use OAuth for authentication, and for authorization, there's what we call RBAC, role-based access control. Is everyone following me? Are you there? Am I speaking to myself? Check the chat. So RBAC, role-based access control. Authentication is how you access the environment, right? Whereby you provide your username and password. How do you access your email? How do you access your Netflix? Right? You'll set it up with an email address and a password. How do you access your PlayStation account? Perhaps you have to set up a username and password. So you are authenticating into that environment. Now, authorization is we are in the house. So let's use the house now. Let's use the house. So this is my house. So this is my house. And this guy needs to enter my house. What does he need to enter my house? He needs a key, right? He needs an access code. If I'm using a smart door, he needs a key to enter my house. So if he has the key, that means he has identified himself, right? He has authenticated. Now, this house has rooms, right? Has bathroom, has bedroom, it has living area, it has basement. So there's a door that leads to the basement. There's a door that leads to the room. Okay. It has kitchen. So now this guy has entered my house. But what is he permitted to do in my house? What is he authorized to do in my house? Can he get some cereals from my kitchen? Is it okay for him to grab cereals? Is it okay for him to go into my cabinet, bring out my plates to use to eat cereal? Is it permitted to use my bathroom? Is it permitted to go and play poker in my basement? Is it permitted to go and watch a movie in my home cinema? So those are authorizations. So if I lock the door that leads to my basement, that means it's not authorized to touch anything in my basement. I didn't give him authorization. If I tell him, you can't go into my kitchen, you can't touch my cereals, you can't touch my food, but you can grab something in the fridge, refrigerator. That means that, okay, you are not authorized to touch anything in the kitchen, but you have authorization, you have permission to grab a drink from the refrigerator. If you are thirsty, you can grab a bottle of water from the refrigerator. So that is layman's explanation for authentication and authorization. So for authentication, this is where you provide the username and password. For authorization, this is now you are inside. What can you do? What do you have access to? Do you have the permission to create a virtual machine? So in your own case now, you were trying to create a virtual machine, right? And you created a Linux server, right? You downloaded a key pair, right? Somebody else, BC, comes in and says he wants to create a virtual network. Now, we have to find out if she has the permissions. So if you are blocked from creating the virtual network, that means possibly you don't have the authorization to create that resource. So we're going to be dealing extensively with this as we go on. See, so we have our OAuth, our back, users, groups, of course, MFA. MFA, self-service reset, self-service password reset. We'll talk more about this. Those are just features of the Azure Active Directory, Azure AD. This is Azure AD now. So you have customers that say, all right, we want to migrate from Azure, from Windows to Azure. We're trying to gradually move away from Windows. We want to move over to Azure. How can we set this up? What do we need to make this happen? There is a tool we use to do this. So we want the users to move to the cloud. Okay. We're going to use Azure AD Connect. That is a service we use to migrate on-premises users, groups, and authentication information to Azure. So the only thing we are going to be moving to Azure is just this entity. Okay, just the users, the groups, the passwords. So it's just a database hosting those information. Those are the things that will go into Azure. So if anybody asks you, how do I set up a hybrid connection for my identity workloads? Right? I have an on-premises environment, but I need to move to Azure. What do I need? The first thing that should come to your mind is to set up Cloud Sync using AD Connect. All right. cloud synchronization, cloud sync using AD Connect. So what I just illustrated for you here, this is a typical example of a hybrid configuration. It's hybrid because we have workloads distributed in two environments. Good. Hybrid. All right. So this is hybrid configuration. And are we recording? Is this recording? Okay. So this is hybrid configuration. We have our on-prem, want to move it to Azure. The only thing you need now is this feature. The only thing you need to be familiar with now AD Connect. Don't forget Azure AD Connect. That is what we use for hybrid configuration. When we need to migrate our on-prem AD to Azure. And when we say on-prem AD, not the whole entity, just users, groups, and their authentication information, their passwords. The database hosting that information will be moved to Azure. So that going forward, you will now begin to create users here, and we can create a system to make them register on premises. Because most of the time you have customers saying, we have apps running on premises. So we want to continue to maintain those apps. We want to continue to maintain access to those apps. And we don't want to have a double Active Directory environment. So we're going to set it up. So we're going to set up the configuration such that these guys can synchronize with on-premises and we can continue to access their apps running on-premises. Any question? Any question? Is this clear?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to go into the documentation. So that's several ways to navigate there. Easy 104. So let's take a break. We'll come back and wrap this up. Okay. We're going to talk about basically everything I've showed you there. We're just going to drill down into it using the documentation. Okay. So let's take a 15 minutes break.
Did you share this with us?
Yes, I did. It's in the chat. It's in Telegram.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I won't be putting it in here because it won't save it. And I want us to be able to access even outside the class. So let me put up the timer for the break. Clock. Pause. So this is what we were trying to illustrate the other time. Remember? This is Windows. This is a hybrid setting. And this is the on-prem environment using Kerberos and NTLM for authentication. In Azure, start talking about OpenID Connect, OAuth, SAML, right? All these are protocols. These are authentication protocols. Sometimes you might be asked in an interview, which one of the authentication protocols are you familiar with? So let's say OAuth. They won't crucify you if you don't. Then there's federation. Those federation service. When we are dealing with business to customers setting. So we'll break that down as well as we proceed.
These are the authentication protocols, the SAML, OAuth, OpenID.
Yes, and federation.
Federation.
That's for Azure. The authentication protocol for on-premises is Kerberos and NTLM. Yeah. So remember the other time I mentioned that when we need to set up hybrid configuration, going to need AD Connect. And what AD Connect is doing is to migrate this component, the user groups, authentication authorization, configuration. This is what it needs to manage them in Azure. And once we're in Azure, it gives you that leverage to be able to access Azure resources. Currently, when you get to Azure, you're on Microsoft 365, right? But beyond that, you want to be able to add identities to your resources. You want to be able to manage permissions to your resources. So managing identity in the cloud makes that possible. So let's look at some features of the Azure Active Directory now. Single sign-on. So let me just do this illustration. In your office, perhaps you have multiple apps, right? You have multiple platforms, and maybe you have a password manager, you have HR, Workday, you have SharePoint, you have Jira, you have Slack channel. So just imagine you have all these apps running. In times back, you will have to create a username and password for each of those apps, those platforms. So if you need to sign into your Jira, you have to sign in again. If you need to sign into your Confluence, to your SharePoint, you will have to provide a username and password all the time. If you need to manage your Workday, you will have to provide a username and password. But because now we're in Azure, you have saved that stress. That stress is taken off of you. So this is where single sign-on comes in. What this does is that with a single username and password, once you are signed into the organization, once you are signed into the network, you are signed into all apps, single sign-on. So you don't have to be signing in every time. You have a single access to all apps running in your cloud environment, even on-premises environment as well. The same set of credentials can be used across all platforms where you have your apps running. And of course, the support for all devices, Windows, Apple, Linux, Windows, Apple, Android devices. You are able to set up MFA. Okay, you don't need to memorize this though, but just get familiar with it. It gives us that opportunity as users to manage our passwords. Gone are those days where you have to call help desk to reset your password. You don't need help desk for an organization that is operating the cloud, that has their identities in the cloud. You don't need help desk for users to manage their password. Many times, I remember a few years ago, people would just call, oh, I can't access my account. I forgot my password. And that's what we're going to be doing. Imagine having like 50 phone calls for an organization of like 6,000 workforce. So having like 100 tickets, right? 50 phone calls of people forgetting their password or misplacing their password, or, just a lot of things going on. So just imagine that's what you did for 8 hours of working hours. Now, if there are workloads in the cloud, if that is in the cloud, you don't need to worry about that. You can now set up self-service password reset for users so that they'll be in charge. What the organization is going to do is what they need is to just set up the password policy. Like, okay, if you ever need to change your password, this is what should happen. It must have maybe a given amount of characters, 16 characters, alphanumeric, lower cases and upper cases. So you just come up with a policy. As long as there's a policy, as long as they sit within that confines of that policy, everything will be good. The Azure Active Directory is a flat structure, unlike Windows Active Directory, which runs on a server, where you have to configure domain services, ADFS, and the domain controllers, right? Is a different workload entirely. In Azure, you are not building any server. You're not building any server. Everything is on the go. If you come here, can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Active Directory, can you see it? Yeah. Two. What's happening? Where's my Active Directory? Oh, okay. The name has changed. So it's now Microsoft Entra. It's not Active Directory. The name has changed from Azure Active Directory. So the name changed 2 months ago. Okay, it changed in July. So it's no more Azure AD. The name has been changed to Microsoft Entra ID. We want to read up the documentation. I thought they said it will be implemented by October. So check out this. Let's play around with it. Okay. Jesus. Post it in the Telegram. So the name has changed. It's no more Azure AD, Microsoft Entra, but it will take a while. This is something that we are used to for almost 11 years. So even more than that, Windows Active Directory has been for a very, very long time. So it's going to take us a moment to be used to Microsoft Entra. All right, so let's see. So for every account created, this is an account. So in your own case, you provided, so for every one of us that have an Azure account, you created a username and a password, right? To set up the account. So that is my own username and password. And once I signed into my Azure environment. This is my Azure environment. Okay. So for every account, there is a corresponding tenant. So when I say tenant, this is a tenant, Azure demo. That's the Active Directory. Why? Well, now Entra. That's the Microsoft Entra environment. Okay, this is the documentation as well. Azure AD is now Microsoft Entra. So I can have multiple tenants. So very important. I want you all to pay attention now. Even though I have just one username and password that I used to sign in, right? You can have multiple tenants. Tenants points to the directory. So that is how we manage organizations. It's just for organization management. So for instance, you could have a company, let's take for instance, Google. So Google owns YouTube, right? Google owns YouTube. What else does Google own? Gmail. Google, they have their own Gmail, gmail.com, youtube.com, youtubetv.com. So just imagine like three. I've told you three apps now owned by Google. So let's assume that this account belongs to Google. Google can have tenants for youtube.com. So these are tenants. It's a one-to-many configuration. One-to-many. One-to-many in the sense that one account, many tenants. Okay. So how many tenants do we have here? Put it in the chats. How many tenants? Okay. So we have 4 tenants. So that means, so this is Urban Records. So Urban Records could be a platform, maybe a music streaming website, right? So this is their tenant. There is Olublex, there is Johnny Dandy, there is Azure Demo. So all these tenants points to an organization. So you can have multiple tenants for different purposes. And each of these tenants are going to have their subscription. So right now, if I search subscription is how we set up, that's how we pay for the resources we use in Azure. So there are different kinds of subscription. In this case now, I have a Visual Studio Enterprise subscription. So in your own case, you have a pay-as-you-go or pay-as-you-go Azure subscription. So it's a pay-as-you-go. Basically, we have free subscription. If you create a new Microsoft Azure account, there's a free subscription that comes with $200, which is available for the first 30 days, thereabouts. But you can't really do much with it. It's free for the most part. Then there is the student subscription. So if you have a student email, you can sign in. There are some benefits that comes with that, but it's not something you want to use for organization, for an enterprise environment. And then there is enterprise level agreement, enterprise level subscription. That is where an organization like Microsoft, an organization like Google will have a collaboration with Microsoft and say, okay, how much discount are you going to give us since we are paying upfront? Okay. So that's the best for organizations. That's the best for global organizations, enterprise organizations with thousands of users. And based on your agreement, maybe you say, all right, we're going to pay upfront $1 million. So we envisage that by the end of the fiscal year, we'll have consumed to $1 million worth of resources in Azure. So Microsoft will say, okay, since you are going to be paying upfront, we're going to give you discounts. They can say, okay, we're going to give you 20% discounts across all entities, across all services and resources in Azure. And then, what was the last one? Pay as you go. So all of us, we are using pay as you go right now because we are only paying for what we use. We don't want to enter an agreement, SLA, with Microsoft. So the moment a subscription is set up and you start creating resources, you will start seeing changes in your costs. So, all right, this is $9. You can check your spending. Let's check our spending in the last. Let's do a custom date range. Let's go to. Let's check our spending for the month of August 2022 to December 2022. See my spending between August and December 2022. So if you don't, sometimes I forgot to turn off the services, the resources I created, and I incurred costs. So if you don't want to be in my position, look at this one, VPN gateway. So this is where we manage costs. As a matter of fact, you can build a career just managing costs for the organization. Like you can be a cloud engineer and your major responsibility will be make sure we don't go over budget. Make sure we don't go over budget. All right. So you have to create budgets. You have to create monitoring features to ensure that you don't go over budget. Do I have a budget for this account? No, I don't have a budget. Oh, I do. So I have a budget. I say, okay, I don't want to go over $120 per month, or I don't want to go over $74, but I shot over my budget. So that was a challenge for me at the time. So very important, please pay attention to your spending. Like at least once in 2 days, check your subscription, look at the resources you created, make sure they are not incurring costs. Like VPN gateway is a buzzer. It's gonna gulp your subscription. Like it's this DDoS, distributed denial of service protection, also consumes a lot of money. So this is where we manage costs, the cost management service. Let's see. Yeah, cost management. So this is where we manage costs, cost management service. This is very important. Pay attention. It's going to be useful for you. And create budgets. Okay, create budgets to manage your spending. So your first assignment is that create a budget. Give it name Azure training budget. That's going to be the name. Create a budget under cost management. Give it the name Azure budget. Set a spending limit. Are you all listening? Set a spending limit. All right, so set a spending limit of $20. Now let's make it $50. Set a spending limit of $50 and save. Okay. Any question? Any question?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, do I need to, you mentioned that we turn off the resource groups. So turning off the resource groups, will it
Deleting. You mean deleting the resource?
deleting the resource groups, will it still allow us to create the budget?
No, you don't need resource group for that. Did you ask for the resource group? You don't need resource group.
Okay.
You don't need resource group. So create a budget, name it Azure Azure training budget, Azure training, set a spending limit of $50. Put your alert email for alert purposes. Put your current email, right? The email you use, your hotline. Yeah, so that if you are approaching your budget, your spending limit, you're gonna get an email. If you exceed your spending limit, you're gonna get an email. You want to put that in. You want to put that in place so that you're not caught unawares. So let's look at some features of Active Directory. Identity. So when we say identity, a user is an identity. Um, a an app that needs to anything that will require authentication is an identity. A device is an identity. An app service, a web app, right? That uses a service principal. So if an application requires a web service principal on premises, we call it service account. If you have a service account that an app needs for authentication, all those are categorized as identities. Of course, accounts. Remember accounts now. You create an account, username and password. That's the account that ties to your tenant. Emphasis on tenants. So sometimes I will tell you Active Directory, I'll tell you tenants, I'll tell you directory, they're all the same thing. So you can have multiple tenants in an account. Okay, multiple tenants in an account. But each of those tenants will have their own subscription, their own license. So even though you have a subscription, right, you will need a license. So what license am I using now? I'm using the premium 2. I'm using the premium 2. So speaking of licenses, So we don't call it Azure AD again. So I'm just going to, so that I can get used to it, Microsoft Entra ID. All right. So we have the free trial version. We have Microsoft 365 license. We have the premium one, premium. We have the premium one, we have the premium two. As it is now, this is free, right? So you 30 days is available for 30 days. And this is Microsoft 365 license. So for some organizations, this is what they are using. Right? Exchange server, Microsoft Exchange server for identity, just as identity, just to manage users and groups. That's all. But in Azure, so these two guys, you will need them, even though you started your Azure experience with M365, Microsoft 365 license. Once you go to Azure, this one is just you just go to I think account dot just go to Microsoft365.com also Office365.com. So you have access to all those accounts, all those users. But they don't, you don't have an Azure presence, right? You are not building servers. You are not building virtual machines. You are not building virtual networks. So you may not need it. But the day you decide and say, okay, we need to start migrating to the cloud. If you use the same credential to sign in into azureportal.com, all right, once you sign in here, or portal.azure.com. So once you sign in into the portal, you will need a higher license to be able to create your resources. So those licenses are categorized as two: premium one, premium two. Premium one, or let's say premium two, for the most part, you're going to be, most organizations I know, they are premium two. This is the highest. This is the highest level. And premium two encompasses every component of free Microsoft 365, my premium one. What makes premium two to be different? Very important. Please pay attention. Very important, because you're going to be asked, you can't miss this, maybe in an interview, the exam, you're going to be like, okay, what makes premium two different from premium one? What makes P1 different from P2 is the privileged identity management capabilities of premium two. So in this case, that means that it gives us the ability to manage governance, right? If you want to enjoy the security and governance features of the identity platform, then go for P2, all right? Privileged identity management functionalities makes it different from P1. The P2, of course, it carries everything that you have in P1 of Microsoft 365 free trial. Okay, so this is P2. I'm using P2 license now. Let me see if I can pull up that. Let's go back to our documentation. Okay, can you see? So if you are looking for business to business collaboration, there for the free, this is about what you get with the free. For Microsoft 365 license, yeah, business to business, everything is just Microsoft 365 apps environment. It doesn't go beyond that. But for premium licenses, yeah, from Azure, hybrid identities. If you want to implement AD Connect, you will need one of these licenses, P1 or P2. If you want to manage tenants, you will need one of these two. All right. And look at the difference. Security and governance. Identity, security, identity, governance. That is what makes P2 different from P1 and every other licensed version. So this is where I got this from. Conditional access, yeah. So it also gives us the ability to implement conditional access configurations. So when you are dealing with devices, when you are dealing with multiple users from multiple locations, you want to be able to manage how they access your organization. Remember, the tenant points to the organization, right? So who can sign in? Where can they sign in? Maybe you want to set up policies that say only accounts in the US can sign in to our org. Only accounts in some specific locations can sign into our org, or only accounts with this level of permission can perform this given identity tasks, right? So that is where conditional access policies comes in. We're going to talk about it as well. So conditional access, PIM, privileged identity management. Those are two key functionalities of the P2 license. All right. So this is the first day. Don't let me overload you. We'll continue from here on Thursday. We'll move on to AD join on Thursday. So your assignment, what's your assignment now, everyone? Create a budget.
Yeah, create a budget under cost management.
Yeah.
With Azure training budget.
Yes, and in addition to that, I want you to create your first user. Okay? Create a user. If you have any challenge with that, it should be straightforward. But I want you to create a user. In my own case, I have 36 users. Yeah. So these are my users. So I want you to create your own user. There are two ways you can create a user. We'll talk more about them in our next class. But before then, I want you to create your user and do a screenshot.
Okay. Let me share my screen with you real quick. I'm trying to delete the resource group, but it's giving me, it's not removing the whole thing.
Let me see.
I'm just playing. This is what it. Can you see my screen?
Yes. Yes, it's deleting now.
Oh, it's gonna, okay.
It will take a while. Refresh it. Let's see. Click on refresh. It's gone.
Oh yeah, it's gone.
Yeah.
Okay.
So sometimes when you make a deployment like that, and it looks like it's taking forever, click on refresh. See if it has cleared out.
You said I can leave the network.
Yeah, leave it. Leave it.
Okay. All right.
Yeah. So stop recording.